So, originally I had a quick video scheduled where I made like a kind of like test for SJWism or social justice warriorism that consisted of 14 points. But in the wake of this whole like propertarian stuff, I figured I'd do a quick rant on this because this is obviously much more important. So, if you haven't heard, a particular faction within the dissident right wing called Propertarianism basically did a event in Richmond, Virginia, and long story short, they kind of humiliated themselves for reasons that I'm not going to get into. You can watch Keith Woods' video if you're interested. And essentially Propertarianism died as a result of that event. Propertarianism as a political ideology and as a movement died in Richmond, Virginia. So in the wake of this whole thing, with Propertarianism dying and with John Mark essentially exiting the internet, many people are now coming to the belief that John Mark and Kurt Doolittle were actually glow-in-the-darks, i.e., like agents working for the government, and that Propertarianism was just a honeypot operation trying to catch people within the dissident right wing on charges of like terrorism to get them on some sort of watch list and potentially get them arrested. Now, again, I'm not going to go into like the whole thing here. You can watch Keith Woods' video for all the information you need, but this is just me giving my thoughts on it. Okay. So, the thing about Propertarianism is that most people, one of the main reasons that people believe that Propertarianism was a honeypot operation was because of the Civil War rhetoric that John Mark and many others engaged in. Now, Keith Woods in his video on this subject said that John Mark was explicitly advocating for violent insurrection. This was not necessarily the case, though. John Mark definitely was big on the whole Civil War thing, but if you watched his videos, and if you remember his videos, he would very regularly say, listen, I call for peaceful separation, I'm just predicting a civil war. So John Mark's position wasn't that we need to have some sort of violent insurrection. John Mark's position was, I want peaceful separation between the right and the left, and if that doesn't happen, then things are going to degenerate into civil war. That was John Mark's position. John Mark's position was not necessarily, let's rise up and overthrow the government. Number one. Number two, the thing you have to remember is that people often talk about how it was strange that John Mark was saying the stuff about what he was saying with regards to the whole Civil War thing, but he wasn't getting like banned from YouTube or stuff. You gotta remember, at the time that John Mark first became popular with the whole Civil War thing, the Second American Civil War thing was a very mainstream meme within the dissident right wing. Within the dissident right wing, at the time that John Mark became popular, the idea of a Second American Civil War was a fairly standard position that a lot of people, including non-propertarians, had, including myself at the time. In fact, I actually did a whole series on the possibility of a Second American Civil War last year. Now, and of course, many others at that time were talking about the possibility of civil war too, Coach Red Pill and Devin Stack included. So if people like Keith Woods are going to be suspicious of John Mark and say that he's a glow-in-the-dark because of his Civil War rhetoric, you also got to accuse Devin Stack and Coach Red Pill of being glow-in-the-darks too, because they were saying the same thing at the time and they weren't in the Propertarian movement. Now, am I saying that Devin Stack and Coach Red Pill are glow-in-the-darks? No, absolutely not. But what I am saying is that because obviously the whole Civil War thing is very controversial now because the position has become associated with Propertarianism, but you got to remember, the point that I'm trying to make is that at the time that John Mark was at the height of his popularity, the Second American Civil War meme was a fairly standard position that many people within the dissident right wing, the majority of whom were not Propertarians, were advocating for. The concept of the Second American Civil War was not a controversial thing. It's just that the Propertarians took that concept, made it one of their main positions, and then, as a consequence, the Second American Civil War thing became associated with Propertarianism. So that's the first thing. Now, don't get me wrong, there is plenty of... Keith Woods did, in my opinion, make a fairly reasonable case for Propertarianism being a honeypot operation. There's a lot of good arguments in that video. But you gotta remember, the Civil War rhetoric was not necessarily a Propertarian position, and it wasn't a controversial position at the time. Now, the last thing that I will say about the possibility that John Mark and Kurt Doolittle are glow-in-the-darks is simply, we don't know. There is a reasonable case to be made that they are glow-in-the-darks, but we don't know. So I won't really side with Keith Woods or with the people that are saying that, or with the... I won't take a position on whether or not Propertarianism was a honeypot operation. But there are good arguments to be made on both sides of this. Now, here's the thing. Ultimately, one of four things is going to happen with the future of Propertarianism, or with the future of the people that were formerly involved in Propertarianism, because Propertarianism's dead. Propertarianism died at Richmond. There are four possibilities for the future of the people involved in Propertarianism, and in particular John Mark. 1. John Mark exits the internet for a year or two. Hold on. I had a cough there. John Mark exits the internet for a year or two, then pulls a Lauren Southern and comes back and starts making like more moderate content. 2. John Mark exits the internet and essentially becomes a normal civilian, and we just never hear from him again. And he just kind of is forgotten, and he just kind of leaves and never comes back. 3. John Mark leaves the internet, and a year or two later, somebody somewhere, or some like random person on the internet somehow uncovers some sort of document or some sort of proof that does prove that John Mark or Kurt Doolittle was indeed a glow-in-the-dark, and that Propertarianism really was a honeypot operation. Or The final option is, well, the final option is simply that John Mark turns out not to be a Fed, but then leaves the movement, and then a year or two down the road ends up pulling a Matt Heimbach and becomes a liberal and starts speaking out against quote-unquote racism. That's the fourth option. So those are the four main possibilities for John Mark and for the future of the people that were formerly involved in Propertarianism. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video or agreed with my rantings, anything that I said on this rant about the whole drama that's happening with Propertarianism, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This is Wolf signing out.